and those deal with tackling aggressive tax planning, using the differences in tax systems to reduce your overall tax liability, and the OECD wants more transparency here and this disclosure. So they really want to ensure the availability of timely, because if you discover it 10 years after the fact, it doesn't help very much, targeted and comprehensive information which traditional audits cannot provide, which the company has to provide and which can be used by tax administrations. And that's probably going to be a point of action. There's probably going to be a digital transactions tax, something like that, to get rid of fat rate shopping and to collect some revenue from countries, from imports from other countries, without a permanent establishment or a fixed place of establishment, as federal legislation calls it. Neutralize the effect of hybrid mismatch arrangement, and there we have double deductions, or deductions without corresponding income inclusion. That's what the OECD understands under this phenomenon. And we can sort of distinguish hybrid entities, which are transparent in one country and real in another country. Dual residence entities, hybrid instruments, means it's equity in one country and it's debt in another country. So none of the income gets taxed according to the OECD. Hybrid transfers, which are ownership, asset is owned in one country and it's really a collateralized loan in another country. What this involved is work on the model treaty of the OECD, with which you're familiar, and the OECD will also make recommendation to change domestic laws. And that has to be coordinated. What I think here is that hybrid entities can be defined, but hybrid instruments are unusually difficult to define. Is something equity, is it debt, etc., etc. Now in one situation it may be equity, in another situation it may be debt. Strengthen, I can fortunately skip most of that point, strengthen controlled foreign corporations. We all know what CFC stands for, I assume, to counter again the base erosion, profit shifting that is going on. And to reduce incentives, really what they want to do with this, to shift profits to low tax jurisdictions. It's difficult to achieve, I believe, and probably should be difficult, because we use the tax instrument also, Tunisia no doubt does, to encourage economic growth, to encourage competitiveness, to encourage foreign investment. Well, how can we do that if everyone taxes everything and there is not much incentive left for the investor to engage in some kind of activity? I think really developing countries should look at the total picture. That means investment and foreign direct investment plus the tax consideration. And what the OECD document is doing is looking only at the tax considerations and not at the consequences it will have for investment. If you want employment, you need investment. So I seem to have a problem here. Now, limit base erosion via interest deductions and other financial payments. We know that interest deductible, dividend is not. Interest deductions there may be interest deductions for the borrower, but no corresponding taxation for the lender, which of course, and that ties up with the parent subsidiary directive in the European Union, which is now being revised or subject to revision. There's outbound base erosion when we use debt to finance the generation of tax-exempt or deferred income. Then, of course, the interest is deductible and the income ultimately is not taxed. Harmful tax practices, the next one, all these bold letters represent an action point, and that taking into account, they say, transparency and substance. That's what they want. They first want the facts in the open and then see what they can do about it. That means this goes back to 1990, that's another interesting kind of thing, when the OECD issued guidelines on harmful tax practices. And particularly they meant then ring fencing. So if you had a country which had an appropriate regime for its domestic industry, it had a different regime, a low tax regime for foreign industries. And it shielded the domestic market from the foreign, the rules that apply to foreign companies.
You know, big corporations are bad. And, you know, sometime later it's going to, you know, change. And if we look at, you know, I'm dealing with two pieces of legislation at the moment. I mentioned FATCA to you. I mean, what was the implementation date for FATCA initially envisaged? And where is it today? You know, we have just had Dodd-Frank. They wanted to implement it in 1 year to politicians. That's what Congress passed, yeah? Where are we today? I mean, you pick up the newspaper and you look at Volcker rule, oh, we just don't even know. You know, they set up 2 new federal authorities and they said, we want you to do it within a year. 2,500 legislation pages later, you know, the industry is nowhere. I mean, you know, there's 67 studies that have been mandated by Congress to undertake. And I just think, you know, this is a more ambitious program than Dodd-Frank. Here are these tax measures that are going to be sort of like brought in. What representation do we have? And was it not a cry in the United States that no taxation without representation? So let us have a say in our future, in our region's future. The minister over here has been, you know, is charged and has the ambit to determine his fiscal policy. This idea that the G20 countries and through their, you know, small think tank, the OECD, is going to dictate your fiscal policies, I think we just need to rethink that. And this idea that developing countries, it is clearly not in the interest of the developing countries. You know, so there has to be an opt-out, and you know, as Dan said, your voice has to be heard at the right things. And this, it is a case of sovereignty. It is about the extension of hegemony of the existing development states. And as Ian pointed out, you know, I come from the UK, and you know, the UK has had its offshore centres. You know, nobody complained about that. Okay, you know, each jurisdiction has had their offshore centres, and all of a sudden, you know, we have a few airlines here in the industry, and everybody's saying this is unfair competition. You know what? This, if the region has decided to have tax-free, give tax breaks or whatever, that's their right. You know, it's the sovereign right of this nation. 1 more minute. Okay, go. 2 more points. Complexity, very quickly. Businesses thrive on predictability and certainty. Okay, such that we know the outcome of commercial transactions. The PE concept is over 100 years old, with case law, with precedents established. We understand that concept. To just go for a revolutionary approach, we just don't think that that is necessary. There is existing mechanics that need to be worked with. And the final thing is obviously the current focus on corporate taxation, not income taxation. My final point is to the taxation authorities, what should you be doing? I think the important thing is have your say, number 1. Okay? Number 2, protect your sovereignty. Okay? Number 3, enhance your existing frameworks. Don't get carried away with this political sort of like newfangled. I think there is existing measures there around, you know, sort of like, if we had solved the permanent establishment issue, the dependent agent issue, we wouldn't be talking about these things, you know, digital economy or otherwise. I mean, I think there is existing frameworks there which need to be enhanced and made applicable. Okay, thank you.